area of life I think about quite a bit, and I'm sure you do as well, is relationships. Particularly when it comes to the closeness of the relationships you have in your life. I'm sure all of us can relate when it comes to your experiences with friendship over time, right? As you grow older, as you go through life, some of the friends that you felt closest to at certain points in your life suddenly don't feel the same way anymore, right? Those friends that you thought were going to be maybe your groomsmen or bridesmaids at your wedding, the friends you would grow old with and sit on the front porch, sitting on your rocking chairs, talking about the good old days. Suddenly, they're not anymore. Something changed, and you can't quite put your finger on it. And it didn't happen all of a sudden, right? It wasn't like a flick of a switch. It was more gradual than that. It started out maybe as soft as a whisper, just enough that you could try to ignore it. But over time, it grew in loudness, in the strength of its voice, to an extent that it's impossible to ignore now. And really, it's not necessarily that things changed externally, but rather you or the friend in question have changed internally, right? And that's where this disconnect starts to happen, where this gap starts to build, is this internal change, right? And it happens in a variety of ways or combinations. Maybe one person stays the same while the other person starts to grow in a way that that distance is created. Maybe you grow, but in different directions. Same thing. Distance is created. You don't feel that same closeness, that same depth, that same fullness in the relationship that you once did before. And that's oftentimes a hard pill to swallow because it's nothing that either of you did wrong. It's something that either of you could have prevented. That's just how life is. It's just how each of your stories has played out. It's something I've definitely experienced myself throughout my life, and especially the last couple of years, as I've undergone what I can safely say is the most drastic 2 year period of change in my entire life so far. Honestly, more than the first, gosh, 21, 2022, 22 years combined, excuse me. And in that time, a lot of the friendships that I once felt close with have slowly trailed off, and admittedly, at times, I've held on, whether for nostalgia or for honoring what once was. But at a certain point, you've got to be able to move on, to let go, both for your own sake and for theirs. And when I think about this sort of dynamic, right, between self growth, change, however you want to call it, and relationships in your life, there's this quote I heard which sums it up pretty well. It goes something like, you can only meet someone as deeply as you've met yourself. And I really didn't understand, I didn't know what this meant until I underwent this period of change and transformation myself and went through the experience of growing apart from certain people, but also growing incredibly close with others. And to illustrate this dynamic, to try and personify, embody this quote, there's something that I've thought about which illustrates it quite well, and hopefully I'll be able to capture it to the best of my ability here for you as well. And we're going to kind of play around with some different, I guess, analogies, metaphors. What's the difference? I don't really know. But I think it gets the point across. So maybe you've heard of free divers, people who dive underwater without the aid of a scuba tank or artificial oxygen, relying solely on the capacity of their lungs to breathe underwater or to hold their breath, right? And certain people, right, those outlandish outliers, the select few, have that natural, innate lung capacity that is just higher at birth, right? Or at a baseline. Let's say that they're able to reach a depth of 10 meters, which we'll use this glass to illustrate 10 meters. They're able to reach that depth. And that's where they naturally venture down to because they're able to, right? They feel comfortable down there. It's not anything unfamiliar or uncomfortable to them. And then there are other people in life who, let's say, they're naturally born with a lung capacity that can reach 5 meters. And likewise, they're used to venturing down to depths of 5 meters because that's what they know, that's what they're comfortable and familiar with. They don't really know what else is out there. They don't know that meters 6 through 10 and beyond exist. And when it comes to relationships, right? Oftentimes, and going back to the quote, right, you can only meet someone as deeply as you've met yourself. We have two people, both with a capacity to get down to 5 meters, right? They fill each other up. You feel that closeness with them. And those are like the early on friendships you have, right? The ones that you believe will remain that same level of closeness throughout your life. But as we know and as we've discussed, people change, people grow, people expand, right? They expand their ability, their capacity to reach greater depths, right? Maybe they expand to a 10. And all of a sudden, those relationships where you maybe once in the past were only able to hit a depth of 5 meters, they just don't fill you up nearly as much, right? You're left with this gap, this distance, this emptiness that is difficult to ignore, right? Because in your own life, you're used to experiencing what 10 feels like. A fullness that is just indescribable. And once you know that fullness of what it's like to venture down to 10 meters, it's difficult to go back to 5, right? And that's where it sort of comes into play, and that's where I've been as well in many of my relationships, is that despite being able to say venture down to 10 meters, when you're interacting with someone who's, let's say, at a 5, you're able to meet them there, right? You're able to swim back up to 5 meters, and they feel no difference per se in most cases. They still feel that same level of closeness and fullness with you as they once did because they're still at the capacity of 5 and you're still able to nourish them and fill them to a 5, but you know that there is still so much more you can give and so much more you can receive. And when that's the case, those are the relationships you seek out in your life, right? You seek out friendships who can match that level of depth, right? Who are able to fill you up just as much as you're able to fill them up. And these are the friends, these are relationships that you feel most fulfilled in. You feel the most depth, the most meaning in a way that you weren't able to before when you're at a 5. And I feel like that's how my experience has been. I admittedly had a capacity to reach 5 meters, right? To have conversations about, shared activities or interests and whatnot. Those, to be quite frank, more superficial topics in life. And while those are great topics to build an initial conversation, they're not the sort of conversations that you really build depth and meaning in. Not the sort of conversations or topics you build a life around. As you expand your depth, you start to have conversations about values, about purpose, about dreams, and whatnot. Because those are what you build a life around. Those are what you build relationships around. And all that to say, right, there's absolutely nothing wrong about having those relationships that you once did in your life. You can still show up for them just as much as they show up for you. But at the same time, you know that out of self respect for yourself and for the other person, it's best that you invest your time, your energy into those relationships that are able to fulfill you as much as you're able to fulfill them. And like I sort of referenced earlier, as someone who, again, the past couple years especially, has gone through this journey, this ongoing journey of expanding self awareness and knowledge, understanding of the self, of meeting myself more deeply, right, than I was able to before. It's possible to increase your capacity via training, just as you would quite literally in a physical sense if you were trying to increase your lung capacity to reach greater depths. And as I've talked about before, you can do this in a variety of ways, right? There is no one size fits all. There is no how to guide to build depth and self knowledge. But it really starts with spending time with yourself, right? Spending time to discover the parts of yourself, the unexplored depths, meters, 6 through 10 and beyond that you didn't know existed in the first place. And that can happen in a variety of forms, whether it's through reading different books, articles, watching videos, listening to podcasts, literally just Googling questions on the internet, like, I don't know, questions to build self awareness or thought provoking questions, who knows. As much time as you're able to really sit down and understand yourself, to continue to deepen your relationship with yourself, your ability to meet yourself. And when you do that, you deepen your ability to meet someone else where they are, to connect with them in a way that you weren't able to before, to connect with them in a way that fills you up like no other relationship in the past has been able to. And I also want to say that if you are currently in this sort of stage, in this sort of funk, if you want to call it that, of undergoing personal change and transformation, where you're starting to feel this slow change, right? You're starting to feel more disconnected from those you once felt close to. I'll be the one to say that it's totally normal. It's totally okay. And as alone as you might feel in this current state, it'll pass, just as all things do in life. As difficult as it may be, as heart wrenching as it may be to feel that distance, to feel that gap where closeness once existed, those people, those people who are able to meet you as deeply as you meet yourself, are out there, right? There's another quote where it's something about what you seek is seeking you, right? The relationships that you seek, the relationships that provide that level of depth that you know is within yourself, those relationships are out there seeking you just as much as you're seeking them. It's only a matter of time. You can't predict when, you can't predict the circumstances, just as you weren't able to predict how the gap and the distance formed between your existing relationships. But when that time comes, when that person shows up, you'll know. It'll be like wildfire. The way that you're able to connect and continually hit a depth with one another that you previously didn't think capable. And the cool thing is, when you are with someone who has that ability to reach that same level of depth as you are, you're able to, hand in hand, side by side, explore new depths and frontiers together. And who knows? Maybe you'll both expand in a way where you're at 20 meters or something instead of 10. But that's how life goes. That's how self growth and change goes. That's how the dynamic between relationships and yourself goes. So, I hope this video was helpful. I hope that my different mishmash of visuals and metaphors or whatever did a decent job of illustrating what I was trying to get across, and that you're encouraged to both stay true to yourself, to continue to build that self awareness, to reach new depths of yourself, and also to continue to be patient for those relationships that are out there with a depth that matches your own. So, with that, I appreciate your time, and I'll see you tomorrow.